that initial zoning, is that the result of city policy in the past?
They got that zoning years ago.
Gotcha.
So,
and during a process like that, it's not appropriate or even legal probably for you to try and change the zoning on the spot.
Well, that's right. You can't down zone a property without a legal consequence, because you're now taking property from someone, right. Someone's uses, someone's potential value. And so you cannot down zone. You can't just zone like a property on Fry Street to be a park. You right. cannot do that if it is not a park now. And you will be sued and you will lose. There's a long history on it. So you can't down zone that way unless you have the property owner's permission.
Gotcha.
Okay, so they had a right to drill anywhere they wanted. Now they came forward with this master plan, which the Allegiance group came forward with the Razor Ranch project. And that master plan limited, they voluntarily limited themselves to 4 sites on that tract, the 4 corners. Because the directional drilling allows you to reach out from each corner. So they self-imposed limit to drill only from the 4 corners, which included the current site. Mm-hmm. It's one of the 4. But their intent at the time, and what I always understood, I wasn't on the council at the time, but I've learned this, that they fully intended to drill all 4 of them and have directional drilling all through the site. Well, my understanding is that technology changed even more and the directional drilling became more refined. They only actually needed to have 1 of those 4. And again, by their voluntarily doing this, it wasn't the city. We could not force them to do anything more than what they were voluntarily doing. They decided to just use 1 of the 4, which is great. Less is better when they had unlimited rights. So each thing has been a progression to limit, and they limited themselves down to 1 site. So at that point, the only thing we can do is put conditions on it to try to make it safer, try to make it less inconvenient for traffic reasons, to make it less impacting around it. But they already had the right.
So, and you guys imposed 21 conditions on it. I think
Yes.
it was a special use permit is what it was,
That's
correct? That allowed you to do that. Have you seen the results of the independent test that was advertised in the paper?
I did.
Last week?
I did. I saw that.
What is the response of the city to those results?
Well, the thing about gas well drilling is that cities the size of Denton do not have staffs that test. If we did, we could test the water, we could test the ground. I mean, we don't have that kind of resources, and it is exceedingly expensive to carry a staff to do that. So we rely upon the state.
Gotcha.
And the state has a long history of doing this, of testing, and they're responsible to protect us. And so the reliance upon the state has its pitfalls, because sometimes the state's not as diligent as you might hope. And so I thank heaven that there are folks out there that are willing to pay for independent testing and to have a verification of what is and isn't working and what is a hazard and what's not a hazard. And so what we're hoping to do is that the state impose some better restrictions on itself, on its requirement to test and the diligence of testing, so that they themselves can put limits on what the rights are of oil and gas developers. It's not just gas, but oil's had this problem in the past with folks contaminating water supplies, and because the rules aren't good enough, and the city's rules are much more limited than the state's, and it has been a state problem. But we put those conditions on there. Those are in addition to the staff's conditions they had already come up with. All of those 21 conditions were various council members researching on our own, trying to come up with alternatives to try to do as much as we can under our regulatory authority.
You have mentioned that the council has already begun discussions on looking at our ordinances related to drilling permits in town. What do you expect, or what do you hope would come out of that might either prevent a similar situation or somehow just looking ahead to the future for future drilling sites?
My direction to staff, and it's just mine, but I think the rest of the council pretty well supported it, was that I want staff to present us with an ordinance that has as many regulatory options as we can find throughout the state that have been upheld.
legally.
So we don't want to go beyond what's legal, because this city's spent a lot of money on legal costs and right down the chute, over the years. But to do what we can legally, to give us options on regulating at a particular site, but not do a cookie cutter approach, because some sites are out in the middle of nowhere or in the middle of an industrial area where the property owner owns all of the property around it. So the same restrictions don't apply to when it's across from McKenna Park. And so we want to have a list as broad and as wide in scope as we can possibly get away with, so that the council can look in an SUP mechanism, which is the special use permit, allows us to look at each individual one differently from the next one. We're not bound by precedent. Give us all these options, look at this particular site, and then impose the options that we can and that are reasonable.
Is it ever frustrating as a city leader, knowing that something like the health of your citizens is potentially at stake, to feel kind of bound by state governing powers, by federal governing powers on issues like this, where you might want to assert city's power, but there is no power to assert? Is that frustrating as a city leader?
Very frustrating. But, you counterbalance it once you have done this for a while. And I was on council for 6 years before, and so I've seen a lot. What you realize, there's no end to what what a local government can regulate. If you give it the authority to regulate every aspect of your life, there will be council members that will want to do it. It's a natural feeling, like you want to be proactive and do something. But there's a danger there of wanting to impose your views of the world, what you want to do, on other people. And when you do that, there's a tendency for a backlash. And so to undo what previous people, the more detailed, the more focused you get, the more dictatorial, if you will, you become on managing people's lives, especially on a local level, the more divisive that tends to become. And it becomes really hard to be a fair and open government, because it becomes a friction, nonstop friction.
Interests.
That's right. So there is a benefit to having someone else make certain kinds of calls, and then to put a wall around what your calls are as a city. And you certainly don't want to have duplication, triplication of the same effort, which happens too much anyway in government. That a lot of waste is not waste at your one level. It's a waste because you're duplicating what the state also does, or what the federal also does, or what industry might also be doing, or private citizens. So that's where the waste comes in. Multiple levels of the same regulation. So that it's a danger. Yes, it's a frustration. You want to do something, be more proactive if you care.
At the same time, that's a very nuanced perspective to have, to understand where those powers lie between state, local, and federal. Citizens don't always understand that, and will look to the city government and say, why aren't you stopping drilling from across here? So the rhetoric becomes difficult in order to talk to citizens.
It takes too long to explain.
Yeah.
And all you can do is hope that the citizenry that elects you has enough faith in their local representation and in your perspective and in your diligence and level of caring that you demonstrate over time. It doesn't happen. You don't run for city council, my personal opinion, when you've done nothing from a community service standpoint in the past. You don't do that. You haven't proven yourself to be a responsible representative of the best interests of the people, because of what you just said. There's a lot of nuances that you cannot explain to everyone. It's just not possible. So you have to rely upon the track records and the philosophies and the motivations behind the folks. And that's what we're here for.